I first saw 1917 in a downtown Chicago theater a few weeks before it went into wide release. Since catching the trailer, I was determined to hunt this film down the first chance I got. Needless to say, it didn't disappoint. I was mesmerized by this picture. By the end, I felt like I had been on this journey with these characters. The making of 1917 was a challenge that director/co-writer Sam Mendes and legendary cinematographer Roger Deakins innovated the medium to complete. Its trademark long-lasting shots involved an incredible amount of planning, patience, and precision. How did they pull it off, and what familial connection does Mendes have to the story? Also, where was Universal as a studio during this period? Let's head into the trenches and start our search. In April of 1917, the Great War wages on across France between the Central Powers and the Allied Powers. Lance Corporal of the British Armed Forces Tom Blake is chosen for an assignment. He picks his friend, Lance Corporal Will Schofield, to accompany him. They're given orders by General John Aaronmore to deliver a message to a Colonel Mackenzie. His Devonshire Regiment's 2nd Battalion is about to attack the Germans roughly 9 miles away. New aerial reconnaissance has discovered the enemy is setting a trap for the Allies, and the planned surge the following morning must be called off. An added element of urgency hangs in the air because Lance Corporal Blake's older brother, Lieutenant Joseph Blake, is a part of the first wave. Together, Blake and Schofield exit the trenches and begin a mission filled with immense danger, violence, tragedy, and the disturbing perils of war. Last time on State of the Studio, the French investment company Vivendi took a controlling stake in Universal, forming Vivendi Universal in the year 2000. It would only hold a majority ownership over the studio for about 3 years. Some notable films put out under Vivendi were The Mummy Returns, 2001's The Fast and the Furious, A Beautiful Mind, 8 Mile, and Master and Commander, The Far Side of the World. In October of 2003, Vivendi announced they'd be selling off 80% of their ownership in Universal to General Electric. This move merged the movie studio with the GE-owned NBC TV network to form NBC Universal. The deal went through the following year and was valued at $43 billion. Under General Electric's majority, Universal Pictures released movies like Friday Night Lights, The 40-Year-Old Virgin, Peter Jackson's King Kong, Marvel Studios' The Incredible Hulk, and handled Inglourious Basterds' international distribution. However, in December 2009, GE announced they'd be relinquishing 51% ownership in NBCU to the mass media juggernaut, Comcast. GE retained its 49% stake by buying out Vivendi's remaining shares. The joint venture was said to be worth over $37 billion and was completed in 2011. By March of 2013, Comcast completed its takeover of the studio by purchasing General Electric's 49% ownership for $16.7 billion. Adding to the entertainment side of things, NBCU acquired DreamWorks Animation for $3.8 billion in 2016. That's where we are as of the posting of this video, and just about does it for the State of the Studio segments. It's been fun talking about the evolution of Universal Pictures over the decades, from its humble beginnings to its multiple international owners. Today, the studio seems to be in decent shape, and hopefully it will stick around in some form for many years to come. After finishing up his second of 2 James Bond movies, Sam Mendes was looking for a project that was going to challenge him. He read plenty of scripts during this period, but nothing was capturing his imagination. It was suggested that he try writing his own screenplay, which the director had never attempted. He found a story worth telling upon recalling the experiences his grandfather, Alfred H. Mendes, used to tell him when he was a child. Mendes' grandfather was a lance corporal for the British Armed Forces during World War I. He was a messenger used often because of his height. At 5'4", the lance corporal was usually hidden by the mists that covered no man's land. Those old stories never left Mendes. The director-turned-writer spun a fragment from one of those stories into a full idea. This was obviously going to be a personal project for him, but he needed help constructing the script. This is when Krysty Wilson-Cairns was brought on board. Together, they crafted a screenplay that became Mendes' passion project. He felt an increasing duty to hand off the history of his grandfather's generation, so the writing team based many small moments and anecdotes on first-person accounts from the Great War. when Blake tells Schofield about the soldier whose ear was bitten off by a rat, or that whole setup and payoff with the milk, they all at least have an origin in reality. Another point of focus was to minimize exposition as much as possible. The setup with General Aaronmore needed to be fairly straightforward, but everything involving the two leads had to come off naturally for the picture to work. The conversations between Schofield and Blake were meant to give a clear idea of who these guys were, how they were different, and how they related to each other. Viewers would learn bits of their backstory and friendship through exchanges that made the audience lean in for details. Sometimes words weren't even needed to convey the heavy emotions both were feeling. Behavior and body language were to supersede dialogue. In the pre-production stages, Mendes and his growing team, including director of photography Roger Deakins, decided on presenting the film, with one exception, as if it all took place in a single unbroken shot. This idea was implemented to make the experience for audiences deeply immersive, but it was going to take an extreme effort from the crew to achieve. A 40-page document mapped out the entire film. Models were built of the sets that were going to be constructed to get a better look at how this was all going to work practically. They tested lighting setups, timed each scene, planned camera movements, and chose where they would place hidden cuts, or blends as they would call them. Every single detail down to the most minute had to be accounted for ahead of time. Roger Deakins and his team did months of research on different camera techniques and combined them all for what worked best in each individual sequence. Sometimes the camera was going to be on a jib arm, sometimes on a Steadicam type rig, sometimes on remote-controlled wires or a handheld gimbal, back of a vehicle, you name it, they did it and then some. The camera operators and grips on set handing off our point of view as the film progressed were the true superstars of this production. Deakins decided on a 40mm lens for almost the whole piece to mimic the photos he'd seen from that era. As for the camera itself, he optioned for the Arri Alexa large format mini. He pushed the camera company to get it early, and they sent over 3 prototypes that Deakins said all worked like a charm. This camera was optimal for the project because of its small size, lightweight, and capability of capturing a huge amount of detail in a digital format. 1917 was the first major motion picture to use it. Dennis Gassner was the production designer on a whole bunch of big films, including our previously reviewed Field of Dreams, and had worked with Sam Mendes on Road to Perdition, Skyfall, and Spectre. He designed most of the structures we see on screen, from the trenches to the whole farmhouse set.
That farmhouse there?
Yes, that farmhouse there.
His biggest challenge was the decimated town of Ikust. Those skeletal building facades being lit through timed flares made it the most nightmarish part of the movie. In all, the core crew said the prep was about 5 times that of a standard film. For the lead characters, Mendes was looking for good actors who didn't have the most recognizable faces to movie audiences. Dean Charles Chapman was known primarily for his work as Tommen on Game of Thrones at the time, and George MacKay was a steady working actor himself with a sizable filmography. The characters they played were meant to seem very different, as if they'd probably never be involved with each other outside the war. Mackay Schofield was in the conflict longer and had been through some tough situations. He was also the more internal of the pair. Chapman's Blake was a bit younger and more eager, still taken with the idea of heroism on the battlefield. He also has an emotional immaturity that's offset by his quick thinking and compassion. The actors and characters complemented each other well, with Chapman calling his time as Tom Blake his favorite work of his career. Bigger stars were used sparingly for smaller roles. The aim was to get more recognizable names to create larger-than-life characters who we only saw a glimpse of. I won't give them all away in the pre-spoiler section here, since seeing them pop up in the film is part of the fun, but Colin Firth as General Aaronmore set the precedent in the beginning. Mark Strong as Captain Smith was probably my favorite of these parts. Principal photography began in the spring of 2019 in the UK. Some of the interiors were shot on sound stages, but scouting the exterior locations proved difficult because of the massive area some of these scenes took up. They dug well over a mile of trenches, hundreds of extras were needed in certain sequences, and many of the set pieces were built on site. This was just a huge production on all fronts. The consistent difficulty they ran into was the sky. Deakins needed an overcast look for most of the movie, and lining up matching backgrounds between their hidden cuts was not easy. They'd have to wait long periods when the sun was out, and sometimes rush to get a shot done when the lighting was optimal. In his commentary track, Roger Deakins said for some of the shots, they did 40 takes, maybe more. It just goes to show that even with everything planned out, you can only prepare for so much before you're actually in it. Things needed to be perfect to blend their shots, so if someone moved in the wrong position or said the wrong line, they'd have to start all over again after several minutes of rolling. That had to be frustrating, but these folks were all at the top of their game, and the end product, with the admitted help of some well-placed VFX, is seamless. Thomas Newman is a composer with a ton of credits leading back to the late 70s. He's done some memorable work with Pixar and composed the music for basically all of Sam Mendes' films. This process was a little different. He was actually writing and recording the score for 1917 while it was being filmed. Sometimes they'd play his music on set while shooting. Newman's work enhances an already edge-of-your-seat experience. His music is almost like another character as it creeps in the background with electronic wind instruments creating a simultaneously calm and threatening ambience. With the lack of dramatic cuts, the score is even more important when building tension or highlighting an emotion. It's an excellent component to the final piece and an irreplaceable part of the story. 1917 wrapped after a 65-day shoot. It was then turned over to the VFX artists and editor Lee Smith. Smith had cut together a handful of Christopher Nolan films, a couple X-Men pictures, and worked with Sam Mendes on Spectre. This was a very unique job, since most of the takes were in chunks up to 8 or 9 minutes, making the selection of each sequence extremely important to the continuity of the film. Smith would say his choices had a domino effect down the line for the remainder of the narrative. Mendes finalized his cut less than a week before its first public screening. That was November 23, 2019. After the film was over, buzz started to build for both future audiences and the awards race. When an enemy plane crashes in their vicinity, Blake instructs Schofield to get the injured pilot some water. Against his better judgment, Will does so, but soon sees his friend stabbed by the German. Schofield kills the assailant, but Tom bleeds out. This leaves Will alone with the mission to stop the attack and save his compatriot's brother. The journey from there gets even more treacherous, as the Lance Corporal encounters snipers and other remaining German soldiers. At one point, he finds himself in the company of a French woman and a baby she rescued in the basement of a mangled acoustic building. After leaving them some milk he found earlier, he continues on and eventually ends up finding the 2nd Devons. In their trenches, he desperately searches for Colonel Mackenzie as the doomed attack begins. He sprints through no man's land to the other side of the trench and forces his way inside to see the Colonel, at last delivering his message. Mackenzie is angered by the intrusion, but follows orders upon reading Army Command's letter. Will didn't make it in time to save everyone, but he stopped a full-on massacre. He then tracks down Tom's brother Joseph, who's helping direct injured soldiers. Some of Tom's effects are passed over, while Schofield somberly informs Joseph of his brother's death. Retreating alone to a nearby tree, Will peers at photographs of his wife and daughters, as his grieved sigh of relief ends the film. 1917 was rolled out a bit slowly. It premiered on December 4th in London and opened in the US in limited release on Christmas Day 2019. This is the week when I must have seen the movie. I remember being anxious to check it out, and it was only playing near me at the big AMC downtown. It later opened in wide release on January 10th, 2020. Critic and audience reactions were very positive. Once in wide release, it shot up to number 1 with a $37 million haul. The movie maintained pretty well throughout January and February until COVID hit and theaters were shuttered in March. It ended up grossing a little over $380 million worldwide against an estimated $100 million budget. 1917 was an awards darling. It was nominated across the board and won in many categories in different competitions. At the 2020 Academy Awards, it had 10 nominations and took home Oscars for Best Visual Effects, Sound Mixing, and Cinematography. From a personal perspective, I found this movie impressive beyond measure. I was so taken aback by the two-shot presentation, but even more by how it brought the viewer into the story and gave us an intimate understanding of the characters. Everything works in tandem to deliver a unique cinematic experience, and the actors were a large part of that. George MacKay added an old-fashioned, stoic heroism to his performance that made Schofield easy to root for. He's brave, competent, and wise, but not physically or emotionally invincible. The sequence in the back of the truck with the soldier mourning his friend's demise is heartbreaking. Seeing Schofield interact with that mother and child was also very bittersweet. It was a perfect blend that seemed to be a metaphor for men of war leaving their families to join the fight. It also hits harder when we find out Schofield is a husband and father. His vulnerability shows up even before Blake's death. When that damn rat hit the tripwire, Will was a goner before Tom dug him out of the rubble and led him out of the crumbling trench. The moment where a blind Schofield is told to jump across that gap is harrowing. Afterwards, when he argues a bit with Blake about getting him involved in the mission, it also sort of tests the limits of their friendship. There's conflict baked into their interactions, which shows us the ups and downs of their association in a very short amount of time, humanizing them even more. Dean Charles Chapman had a compelling turn with Blake as well. His emotions are worn on his sleeve his entire screen time. You really feel that he's just a kid swallowed up in something overwhelmingly huge, like many of the soldiers involved here. The cherry blossoms evoking memories of his civilian life and how they pop up again just as Schofield is about to give up shows the impact he's had on his friend and the audience. Tom's death scene is played perfectly with panic and sorrow. According to both Sam Mendes and Roger Deakins' commentary tracks, Chapman was so in the moment that he felt like he was really bleeding out. In the movie, you see the color drain from his face, and one would assume this was done in post-production, but apparently not. The director and cinematographer both stated Chapman turned pale right then and there without additional assistance. It's kind of hard for me to buy into that, but I guess it's not outside the realm of possibility. It's certainly a great visual that helps us buy into the situation. As for the more well-known actors, they all nailed their parts too. Toward the end, Benedict Cumberbatch and Richard Madden both unsurprisingly delivered. Madden especially played Joseph Blake like we had known him the whole movie. His interaction with Schofield felt like two equals sharing in a terrible loss. Who would have thunk a Stark and an inbred Lannister being brothers would be so believable? I've watched 1917 at home several times, and it holds up great on a smaller screen, but there's no doubt it was an exponentially superior experience in theaters. This film was made to be watched on the biggest screen possible with great sound and fellow moviegoers. It really felt like a one-of-a-kind event that is as memorable a trip to the theater as I've ever had. Some of these shots are just gorgeous and made me feel like I was at Schofield's side, going through the changing landscapes with him. I think the acoustic scene especially shined for its brilliant set and profound lighting techniques. Mendes said he wanted our main character to descend into hell, and he succeeded. One of the greatest cinematic achievements that I've ever seen is Schofield's sprint across no man's land during the climax. What a moment. The music, the visuals, the tension, the emotion. My goodness! This makes the hair on the back of my neck stand up to this day. It's an astonishing finale to the journey we've been on for the hour and 37 minutes prior. And that's what movies were made for. Very rarely does a single moment reach a pure zenith like this. Those are all real extras. Some of the explosions were real, and George MacKay even really bumped into those two guys and fell over. He was told ahead of time by Sam Mendes to get up and keep running if that happened. The fact that Schofield is rushing to stop an attack that's starting right in front of him also heightens the drama. This brings me to the question of if 1917 is the greatest war movie ever made. I'm not saying I've seen every war movie, but this has got to be up there with the likes of Apocalypse Now, Saving Private Ryan, the original All Quiet on the Western Front, and the rest of the classics on top of the genre. Now, some people don't like war movies. They think they're boring and kind of all blend together. I can maybe understand that point of view on some older films in the category, but I feel like this one reinvented the format in a way that has to be acknowledged. No, it's not really all in one take, but the filmmakers never claimed it was. Yes, that would have been 100 times more impressive, sure, but they still captured that sensation. Most of the cuts are so seamless, I never would have even guessed a majority before Roger Deakins pointed a lot of them out in his commentary track. Even if you missed your chance to see this in theaters and aren't a fan of war films, I'd encourage you to give 1917 a try. It is absolutely thrilling and an accomplishment more than worthy of recognition. Special thanks to a handful of informative and succinct extra features on the Blu-ray. I really enjoyed those. As always, check out the Walter Culture YouTube channel for more content. Join me next time for the last juniversal video of this little odyssey through the decades. It's kind of another war movie, and it will be a challenge to cover. But I'm looking forward to it. See you soon, everyone. Until then, keep on trucking along.